me tell you a little story. I remember a few months ago, I was sitting in the theater watching some new movie, and the Superman trailer came on from James Gunn. I was like, all right, pretty cool. Well, as soon as we found out it was a Superman trailer, which is, within a few seconds of seeing the trailer, the guy probably a row or two behind me, all I heard was, another one? And that was my first introduction to what maybe the general population thinks of yet another reboot of Superman. But can James Gunn pull off this new DC universe that he's trying to do? Well, I just saw the new Superman. Let's talk about it. What's going on, movie fans? Thank you for jumping in today with Movie Tactics. We're talking about the new Superman from James Gunn. Just came out. I actually saw it at AMC in Dolby, so it was a nice viewing experience. About half the theater was full on opening night, so that bodes pretty well, I think. This new movie features a brand new Man of Steel, David Corenswet, and then you also have Lois Lane, who is Rachel Brosnahan, and then Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, all three of these actors and actresses did a phenomenal job playing these characters. I thought there's no problems with any of them on how they portrayed the characters, especially because I've seen all the other Supermans, and I know that a lot of them are just completely different. And really the overall vibe of these characters, it really honestly seemed to match up what you would think of them from the comic books. It's not something that's just over the top. It's not something that would be designed just for the movie. It almost feels like you're watching a comic book, which is something I really appreciated from this movie. I thought from all the Superman movies, from The Flash and all the various DC just slop, let's call it at this point, this movie felt closer to me to a comic book style of movie than has almost ever been from a DC perspective. I will say it's kind of like the Thunderbolts. Maybe it's a glimmer of hope. It's a movie that came out and was maybe a little bit of something different than we've seen in the past 5 or so years, that we've had a lot of fatigue. I think Marvel fatigue. I think DC had a lot of flops. I think there's a DC fatigue and Star Wars and all that as well. I think a lot of people are just worried about those franchises, and there's almost too much content on them. And the stories have been told over and over again. And what I thought this movie brought, and I think James Gunn really tried to portray a little bit, and there's still bad things about this movie we'll talk about in a sec, but what I think he tried to portray a little bit was, this is a single comic book. So I loved how this movie, you can tell from the trailers that it seemed to skip over the usual origin story that we're used to from a Superman movie, where you hear it over and over again. Oh, the farmhouse, and he gets landed, he's a baby. They touch points on that real quick and kind of sprinkle it in throughout the whole movie. But this movie is really a quick intro on who Superman is, and now let's talk about his daily life. So they throw him right into a story, kind of like you'd see in a comic book, right? You'd have the villains, you'd have team-ups, you'd have Superman himself and Lois Lane already talking about the stories and doing stuff with the press, and it just feels like it's coming right off of a page of a random book that you pulled out of one of those old white boxes at the comic book store, which I really enjoyed. I think a lot of people had a lot of good humor to kind of see from this movie. I heard a lot of chuckles in the audience when there are some characters who came on screen, and you've seen some of these sneak peeks here in the trailer. I don't really want to spoil it for you. This is not a spoiler review, but they have some cool characters that pop up that we've seen before, and then some we haven't seen before, and they're kind of trying to set this up as a new DC universe, as we've kind of heard from James himself, and they're really cool. It's kind of fun to see these new characters in a way some movies we haven't seen in like 15 years, so it's kind of neat to see on screen again. And of course, the dog stole the show. Let's be real. Krypto stole the show for sure, and there's also a couple of characters towards the end we get to see that we've never seen, at least in this particular universe, but everyone's also been recast, right? So this is a whole fresh-faced DCU, as it were, and I think that's kind of what James is trying to do for it. Another good note, I would say, would be the CGI. I know this movie is mostly CGI, as you'd expect with a superhero movie, but this is not the Flash CGI. This is more like Spider-Man CGI, I think. It's something where they did a good job blending the CGI with the realistic sets, And I didn't have any issues with it. As someone who is watching out for that, I hate having that blurry CGI where things are moving too fast, so you don't know what's happening because they just have that little bit of blur to them. Everything's pretty smooth. Even the dog, they did a great job. That dog is CGI 100%. And they did a great job on setting him up. And I thought he was adorable. Everything was very highly detailed, not a lot of blurriness going on. And of course, that kind of adds to the feel of the movie. It doesn't really take you out when you're all of a sudden seeing this thing that's so far out of place that's like, oh wow, they really cheaped out on this part for the special effects. But overall, I think the CGI was very, very decent. Now, some of the bad things about this movie, because it's not all great. I mean, I left the theater kind of feeling good about it. It's not a deep movie. This movie seemed like it was pretty shallow. I mean, you kind of have to almost understand real quick who these characters are. And if you don't, then you kind of get a feel for who they are, but they don't really explain it very much. There's a couple of new faces on here that I was like, I don't really know too much about, but I've heard their names before, but they don't really talk about much beyond that. Maybe some about their powers or their abilities, or no origin stories from any of these new characters, which is fine because a lot of that could be considered just white noise, honestly, if you already know who they are and you're coming into this movie. But also the editing of this movie is really weird. I don't know if James kind of went back to the table and was like, what is this movie about again? Should we keep it like this? Maybe cut a bunch of talking out, because it was a fast-paced movie. There's a lot of action. There's a lot of comedy in here, and there's go, 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 go. There's not really a lull at any point. Even if there is a lull, there'll be a lull of talking, but then there'll be something going on in the background that kind of draws your gaze. There's some questionable scenes early on in the movie that you really don't get answered towards the end of the movie. So you're sitting there wondering, well, why did this happen? And then at the end, you're like, oh, all right, that makes sense. So it's a movie you do want to pay attention to, but it's not that hard to not pay attention to because it is pretty action-packed and the characters are pretty fun to watch and they're likable. I think a lot of movies nowadays, especially with like watching some of these Marvel movies, especially anything coming on streaming like right away, you're just like, I don't want to watch these characters. They're insufferable or whatever it is. These characters are all very likable. They're funny. One other kind of relatable negative for this movie, I think, would be related to how shallow the story is. You're kind of just skimming the surface. Like we talked about, it's kind of a comic book, so it's not really too deep anyways, but the overall villain and this whole military and defeating an army that we saw in the trailer, well, that whole thing is really a big part of the movie, and they didn't really have a whole lot of background to who these armies were and why they were so aggressive and why are they trying to take over this place and why were they trying to fight. And then when they did have these fighting scenes, there was really kind of quick cuts and there wasn't a whole lot of actual fighting. Now it's a DC movie, so maybe there wouldn't be a lot of firearms usage or tactical usage at all, but it didn't seem like they really did much at all. And there's kind of some plot holes there for why this army would be doing this and also why they wouldn't actually go and do more with the army that they have in this super advanced military that they ended up having. Just seemed kind of weird to not utilize that at all. So there's some good and some bad in this. I don't know if it's actually DCU kind of a setup for this. We'll see how far that goes. There are a couple of post-credit scenes, so make sure you stay till the end there. I'm going to give Superman by James Gunn an 82%. I really enjoyed it. Honestly, I think it was a fun time. There wasn't a whole lot of fluff in this. There wasn't anything too political, I guess you would say, that might take away from the overall comic book vibe of this movie. And I think he did a good job overall. What did you guys think of the new Superman? Did you get a chance to see it yet? I know it just came out this weekend. Let me know in the comments below. What did I miss? Anything in particular you didn't really like? I would love to hear your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you in the next movie review.